reporters questions and then ask each other questions during the second half. The debate runs about an hour.
Test 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, test 1, 2.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Ken Bodie, the moderator for tonight's debate. This is the first of two debates between the two candidates for the United States Senate, Senator Edward Kennedy and Mitt Romney. These debates came about as a result of an unprecedented cooperation between the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. The forum is also being broadcast live thanks to major television and radio stations in Massachusetts. Let me introduce the candidates. Edward Kennedy, the Democratic candidate, has served in the Senate since 1962. He is 62 years old and is a graduate of Harvard College and the University of Virginia Law School. Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate, has served as Chief Executive Officer of Bain Capital, a venture capital firm. He is 47 years old and a graduate of Brigham Young University, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Business School. The panel for tonight's debate consists of three reporters who have been covering the Senate race in Massachusetts. Sally Jacobs of the Boston Globe, Joe Battenfeld of the Boston Herald, and Tovia Smith of WBUR-FM. During the first half of the debate, the candidates will be questioned by these reporters. The rules are simple. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and his opponent will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. In the second half of the debate, the candidates will question one another. It was determined earlier by a coin toss that the first question from Sally Jacobs will go to Senator Kennedy. Sally Jacobs.
Senator, you're the fourth most senior member of the United States Senate. Your opponent is a novice who's never held or even run for office. Why is this race even close?
In Massachusetts, as throughout New England, we're facing uncertain times, primarily on the economy. We have seen since 1988 to 1992 some 400,000 jobs that were lost in Massachusetts. We've seen some recovery in the past 18 months, a 3-point decline in the unemployment rate, so we're on our way back. But these are not the good jobs that we lost in the 88 to 92 period. And when there is a loss of jobs, there is uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, there's anxiety. And when there's anxiety, there is a willingness to listen to simple, easy answers, and they're wrong. And that is the kind of solution that my opponent is offering in dealing with the economy and dealing with the vital issues that are of the utmost importance to working families in Massachusetts.
Mr. Romney.
Sally, the real answer to your question is that people in Massachusetts have been watching for 32 years Senator Kennedy. They appreciate what he's done, but they recognize that our world has changed and that the answers of the 1960s aren't working anymore. And frankly, the senator's right when he says there's a challenge to our economy, and people recognize that government jobs just can't do it for Massachusetts. We need private sector jobs. And so they're looking for people who have skill and experience in the private sector, who know how to help create jobs, who will do the work of traveling from state to state and around the country to bring jobs to Massachusetts.
Joe Battenfeld. Joe Battenfeld, the question for Mr. Romney.
Yes, Mr. Romney, many undecided voters, even those inclined to vote for you, are concerned about losing Senator Kennedy's seniority. If elected, how would you ensure that Massachusetts doesn't suffer as a result?
I'll work tirelessly. I will work tirelessly to bring jobs to Massachusetts, to bring everything that can be brought to Massachusetts. Let me tell you, this idea of clout sometimes gets overstated. Every 6 years, you get a senator coming to a state with one of those big cardboard checks. And they have a whole file folder of them, and they try and convince you that all the money that comes here comes because of their clout. 2 years from now, it'll be John Kerry's turn. But the taxpayers of Massachusetts are seeing through that, and they recognize that those checks are drawn on their bank accounts, that we're the ones that are paying for all that pork. And they recognize that we have to have a Massachusetts that brings jobs from the private sector, that can employ our people, and that we cannot rely entirely upon government and pork. I'll work day and night to do everything I can, but I'll tell you one thing, it's time to have a senator who can create jobs.
Senator Kennedy.
The soundness of the Massachusetts economy depends on infrastructure, like we have in the expressway, the Third Harbor Tunnel. It depends upon incentives in the private sectors. And that's what we have been doing in building the biotech, the software industry, the telecommunications, the fiber optic industry, as well as bringing the return of manufacturing in. And it takes well-trained, well-educated individuals that will be able to have the best jobs, good pay, and compete with any other part of the world. That's what I'm about in the United States Senate. Training, education, ensuring that we're going to have good jobs to build the Massachusetts economy. And I'm proud of the efforts that we have had so far.
Let me ask the audience, please. You're clapping after every response. You really are eating up a lot of time. Wait till there's something really to clap for, okay? Tobias Smith, a question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, for 30 years you've been a leading advocate for social welfare and anti-poverty programs. There's now a wide public perception that our welfare system is deeply flawed, and many people see you as the embodiment of an outdated political philosophy of a big spending liberal government. Has our social welfare system gone too far, and aren't you now out of sync with public sentiment?
I'm for workfare. I think there has to be an expectation that men and women who are able-bodied are going to have to work. The men and women that contribute for that kind of support system are working. Able-bodied men and women must be able to work. But it's so interesting to me to see, having been in the United States Senate, that we had talk about welfare reform under President Reagan and under President Bush, and neither of those presidents did anything about it. Finally, we have a president who's doing something about it, and I'll work with him. In the 1980s, I offered a welfare reform program that passed the United States Senate unanimously, received Republican and Democrat support, passed the House of Representatives, signed into law, and the Republicans refused to support that program. I'm concerned about the program, and I will work, when I return to the United States Senate, to make the changes so that everyone that can work will work. But I recognize that we need a support system for children. It's necessary to have a safety net for children, and I think that that has to be a part of any reform system.
Mr. Romney.
Everywhere I go, people are concerned about our welfare system, not because they think it's costing too much, and it is, but rather because they feel that it's not doing what it needs to do, and that's to bring people back into the American system and give them a hope and give them an opportunity to have their dreams fulfilled. We need a welfare reform plan, not like the one the senator passed in 1988 that was supposed to get people back to work, but 93% of which never did. We need a new welfare reform plan that insists on work from the very beginning, one like Governor Wells, one which also makes it easier and more attractive for employers to hire and train people who are on welfare. We need to bring work back to welfare.
Sally Jacobs, a question for Mr. Romney.
Mr. Romney, you personally oppose abortion and as a church leader have advised women not to have an abortion. Given that, how could you in good conscience support a law that enables women to have an abortion and even lets the government pay for it? If abortion is morally wrong, aren't you responsible for discouraging it?
One of the great things about our nation, Sally, is that we're each entitled to have strong personal beliefs, and we encourage other people to do the same. But as a nation, we recognize the right of all people to believe as they want and not to impose our beliefs on other people. I believe that abortion should be safe and legal in this country. I have since the time that my mom took that position when she ran in 1970 as a U.S. Senate candidate. I believe that since Roe v. Wade has been the law for 20 years, that we should sustain and support it. And I sustain and support that law and the right of a woman to make that choice. And my personal beliefs, like the personal beliefs of other people, should not be brought into a political campaign. Too much has been written about religion in this race. I'm proud of my religious heritage. I am proud of the values that it's taught me. But if you want to know my position on issues, ask me and I'll tell you. I think the low point of this race was when my opponent and their family decided to make religion an issue in this campaign. Brought it out, attacked me for it. I think that's a mistake. I think the time has passed for that. John Kennedy was the one who fought that battle. Let that battle live for all of us of all faiths.
Senator Kennedy.
I would agree with Mr. Romney that religion has no place in this campaign, and the best way to make sure that it doesn't is not to talk any further about it, and I don't intend to do so. On the question of the choice issue, I have supported the Roe v. Wade. I am pro-choice. My opponent is multiple choice. I have not only introduced the freedom of choice legislation, but I have wrote and saw successfully passed the clinic access bill that will permit women to be able to practice their constitutional rights in selection of abortion. And I have also led the fight against judges in the Supreme Court of the United States that refuse to permit a woman's right to choose.
Senator, time is up.
Ken, on multiple choice, I've got to...
Mr. Romney, you have 15 seconds to rebut that.
On the idea of multiple choice, I have to respond. I have my own beliefs, and those beliefs are very dear to me. One of them is that I do not impose my beliefs on other people. Many, many years ago, I had a dear, close family relative that was very close to me who passed away from an illegal abortion. It is since that time that my mother and my family have been committed to the belief that we can believe as we want, but we will not force our beliefs on others on that matter.
Thank you,
and you will not see me wavering on that or be a multiple choice. Thank you very much.
Okay. Gentlemen, what I'm going to try to do is when I think there's a reason for a rebuttal, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to suggest 15 seconds, and please let's try to stick with it if we can, okay? Joe Battenfield, the question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator, you have spent much of your campaign attacking Mr. Romney's business record, specifically for his firm's investment, which led to a strike at an Indiana paper plant. As someone with no business experience yourself, how would you have handled that situation in Indiana differently if you were in Mr. Romney's shoes?
First of all, Mr. Romney has characterized one of his prime reasons and qualifications for the United States Senate is his business background. Therefore, it's legitimate to look to what kind of jobs that he has created. The kind of jobs that he has created are part-time jobs and minimum wage jobs, primarily, that don't have any health insurance. Now, that is not the kind of jobs that I want to create. There are different ways for venture capitalists to deal with a situation like Indiana. Either you can close the plant down, throw the people out of work, only hire back the younger workers, and let the older workers off the hook, or you can retrain the workers, bring them involved in further education and training, invest in those companies and corporations, and create full-time jobs and good pay with good benefits. That is the kind of record would have impressed me in terms of the creating jobs. If we have Jordan Marsh and Filene's and Stop and Shop provide health insurance for their part-time workers, what's wrong with Mr. Romney's companies providing the same thing?
Mr. Romney.
I've got a lot of things to answer on that and only 30 seconds to do it, but let me tell you this. In my view, that attack on part-time workers not having health insurance is the height of hypocrisy. Senator Kennedy and his family have a multiple real estate empire across this country, including the Chicago Merchandise Mart, the jewel of their empire. That merchandise mart has a free cash flow reportedly of $20 million a year. Senator, I'm sure you know that your workers who are part-time employees don't have health insurance there, don't you?
Senator, 15 seconds.
Mr. Romney, there's a very big major difference. That is, you don't even afford access to your part-time workers, where 66% of the American people do provide it. We at least provide the access, and many of those part-time workers take it, and it's a shared responsibility, and you don't even meet that mean standard.
Senator Kennedy,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well,
we're going to have
Senator, you don't provide health insurance for your part-time people, and
we
you've
are
been
going to
berating
have an
me across this
opportunity.
campaign.
Mr. Romney.
Gentlemen. We are going to have an opportunity to get right back to this question in the Lincoln Douglas segment of the debate. Let's proceed now to Tobias Smith with a question from Mr. Romney.
Mr. Romney, you say you're a moderate on social issues, one who will defend abortion rights, equal rights for women, for blacks, and for gays. In fact, you say you will do more to promote gay rights than Senator Kennedy. You also sit on the National Executive Board of the Boy Scouts of America, which has an exclusionary policy banning gay members. Do you support that policy? And if not, have you ever done anything as a board member to oppose it?
I have let my views be known. I have been to one board meeting now of the National Boy Scouts of America Board. I believe that the Boy Scouts of America does a wonderful service for this country. I support the right of the Boy Scouts of America to decide what it wants to do on that issue. I feel that all people should be allowed to participate in the Boy Scouts regardless of their sexual orientation.
Senator Kennedy.
Well, I support the openness and the access to against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, including in the Boy Scouts, and have fought for that when we have had several nominees to the United States Senate that have stood by that principle, and I've been proud of it.
Sally Jacobs, a question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, what is your greatest personal failing, and how have you attempted to deal with it?
I think it's probably talking personally and talking about myself, and revealing personal values and personal disappointments and personal achievements. I know that I have not lived up to all the expectations of people here in Massachusetts. I made that statement to the people of Massachusetts a number of years ago. My life has changed dramatically. Every day of my life, I try to be a better human being, a better father, a better son, a better husband. And since my life has changed with Vicki, I believe that the people of this state understand that the kind of purpose and direction and new affection and confidence that I have on personal matters has been enormously reinvigorating. And hopefully I am a better senator and will be a better senator because of that passage of time.
Mr. Romney, would it be fair to let you answer the same question as to
I
your
presume
greatest...
about myself, yes.
Yes, okay.
I would...
And you have a minute for this one. You have a minute for this one, yes.
One of the challenges of life in this society today is the burden of occupation. And I've been very busy in my work. I have a wonderful family. I'm very busy there. But you'd grow too far apart from the people you care about. And that's, after all, how we're going to be judged in this life, what we've done for other people. And so I spent 2.5 years at the early part of my life living with the poor and serving with the poor. And when I came here to Massachusetts, we decided that one day each week I would give in service to people less fortunate than myself. I've spent hours and hours, hundreds of hours in hospitals across the state from Worcester to Boston, working with sick people, talking to them, consoling them.
Mr. Romney, can I interrupt you? This was a question about your greatest personal failing.
My greatest...
We have 30 seconds left to get to that part of the answer.
My greatest personal failing then, Ken, is my inability to fulfill what I think is a God-given obligation to do more. And I do what I can in one day a week, but I don't do as much as I think we all can do.
Joe Battenfeld, a question, please, for Mr. Romney.
Mr. Romney, you're a multi-millionaire businessman who has lived a near fairy tale life, far removed from the everyday struggles of most people. Why should voters believe you have any empathy with their problems?
Well, as I was saying a moment ago, I have spent my life not just in earning money. I was lucky about 4 years ago to win the lottery, almost literally. I got involved in a business that became more successful than anything I'd imagined. But that isn't how we grew up. That isn't how we started living. And I've spent my time serving in my community. I've given a day a week to help other people. I have done that in the Boy Scouts. I've done that in my church. I've done that in schools and in the businesses that I've been involved in. I have invested in some 61 different entrepreneurs. Some of them have been able to be successful and grow. Others have seen their businesses shrink. But during that period of time, I've been associated with helping to create 10,000 new jobs. I know the people that have many of those jobs. I've watched them get promoted. I've been close to their lives. Those associations in work, in my charitable activities, and in my home have brought me close to people of all different backgrounds and stripes. And it is that background that draws me into this race. I am concerned that the answers that Senator Kennedy has been selling all of these years have not worked for those people.
Senator Kennedy.
Well, first of all, as I think Franklin Roosevelt said, it isn't where you come from, it's where you stand. And the two best friends of working men and women in this century have been Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy. And I think I would take the out-of-step comment of Mr. Romney and ask him to go with me to Haverhill, Massachusetts and visit Mrs. Rorak, who's getting Meals on Wheels, or go to Stonehill College and talk to the young students who are getting direct loans because of my leadership in the United States Senate, or go to the South End where I was today and visit that neighborhood center and talk to those parents and children and ask them whether I'm out of step.
Senator, that time is up. Thank you. The next question is from Tobias Smith for Mr. Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, you present yourself as a crime fighter, yet you oppose many measures that the anti-crime community supports, such as mandatory minimum sentencing and the death penalty, which is favored by 70% of Massachusetts voters. How can you say you represent voters when you oppose these widely popular measures, and aren't you out of step with voters on this issue as well?
First of all, I am for the mandatory life sentence for those who commit homicide, first-degree murder. I'm for that mandatory. Secondly, I'm for mandatory sentencing for 3 strikes and you're out. Third, the whole truth in sentencing provision of the sentencing guidelines, which was the legislation which I put, provides mandatory sentences, eliminates parole. And I'm so glad that here in Massachusetts and in other states, they're finally finding out about truth in sentencing. I'm the author of the sentencing reform program. I'm the author of the bail reform program that permits district attorneys to hold dangerous individuals, to hold them without release or bail. And I'm the author of the violent juvenile offender provisions. And I've been the leader with Dianne Feinstein and Howard Metzenbaum in getting guns off the streets of this country. And I'm going to go back to the United States Senate and continue that fight.
Mr. Romney.
And now, Tovia, the rest of the story. Senator Kennedy was at the conference committee where the crime bill was dealt with, and he was the deciding vote that said there would not be mandatory sentences imposed on people who use guns in the commission of crimes, that there would not be mandatory sentences imposed on people who sell drugs to minors, that the juveniles who rape and murder would not be required under the Carroll-Moseley-Braun Amendment to be tried as adults. And as we understand, he has fought year after year against the death penalty. That is why the Boston Police Union, the Worcester Police Union, and police all over the state support my candidacy, because they know I am tough on crime.
Senator Kennedy.
This is being really tough on crime. I had the violent juvenile offender that permitted, at the discretion of the judges, trialing a violent juvenile at 15 years of age. Carroll-Moseley-Braun offers mandatory trial of a child without a previous conviction that's 13 years of age.
Our last question.
And I voted to give that as an option to the judge. Mandatory at 14, optional at 13,
Senator,
and my opponent says that I'm weak on crime against children. Give me a break, Mr. Romney. Give me a break.
That's been happening for years, Senator.
We're going to come back. Gentlemen, we have one more question from the press panel, then we're going to get to the Lincoln Douglas panel. It's only going to be the 3 of us up here then.
Maybe.
Time isn't as strict, I promise. Sally Jacobs, a question for Mr. Romney.
Mr. Romney, next month, California voters will decide on a ballot proposal that would eliminate all services to illegal immigrants except emergency care. If the measure were being considered in Massachusetts, what position would you take?
I would not be in favor of such a provision. I think that our immigration policies are too lenient, that we're not being tough enough at our borders. I think we have far too many illegal immigrants coming into our country. I think Senator Kennedy's leadership of that subcommittee on immigration has had failings. I think it's a mistake for us to be bringing in almost 300,000 illegal immigrants a year. I would toughen our border patrols. I would be more strict in returning people to their country of origin. I would also insist that people who come here who are illegal aliens do not have the opportunity to take advantage of benefits in our system. But I do not believe that we should deny all services to people who come here from across the border.
Senator Kennedy.
I agree. It makes no sense not to immunize a child. If you do not provide some help and assist to a child who is attending a school, that child's going to be out of the school, is going to be the gang member the next day. We have to provide help and assistance to those communities, and we have to work that out in the next session of the Congress. Mr. Romney, The Republicans were running the immigration service for the last 12 years. Where in the world have you been? They have been running it, and they have mixed that whole program up. I'm glad that we added the funding for border control. And what is essential in terms of, for immigration is a tamper-proof identification card.
Senator Kennedy, thank you very much. Time is up. I want to thank our panel for an excellent set of questions. We now move to the second part of the debate. The concluding half of tonight's forum will resemble a freewheeling format like the one used in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. The candidates will question one another. They will engage in debate on whatever issues they choose to. There is no strict time limit on the candidates in this section. It was determined by a toss of the coin that Mr. Romney would pose the first question to Senator Kennedy. Mr. Romney.
Senator Kennedy, my impression has been that you have followed a campaign, as soon as the primary was over, of trying to divert the voters' attention from the issues at hand and instead making personal attacks on me, which are unfounded, characterized by the Boston media as untrue, unfair, and sleazy. You said, for instance, that my firm has 40 people and only one is a woman. Well, you're wrong. 12 are women, including our chief financial officer. You've said we give no benefits to Americans, no health care benefits to Americans. We have 40,000 employees in firms I'm associated with who give health care benefits. Only part-time don't have health care benefits, and that happens to be the same as your firm, as we just found out. The strikers that you criticize me for, as you well know, were strikers in a company that wasn't even invested in when I was at Bain Capital. It happened 6 months after I left, and yet you parade that around like it's my problem. The minimum wage, you say I'm not in favor of the minimum wage. I am in favor of the minimum wage, and you have yet to produce any document which says that I do not support the minimum wage.
All right.
When will this end?
Now, let me stop this right now. Let me stop this right now. I think it's fair to ask each one of you to take your first minute for both a charge and a question, and then we'll open it up. Is that fair enough, gentlemen? Can we agree to that? And he just had his, so I'm going to have the timer count us down. You'll see a time card, go right to a minute. That's your question, and then we'll open it up and let you argue it out after that, okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
I would have thought that Mr. Romney would have asked me what I was going to do for working families in Massachusetts, how we're going to get our economy on the road, expressing differences, talking about the real measures that are going to affect children, working families, our senior citizens. Mr. Romney, I'll provide after this debate all the documentation that you asked for, and I hope you'll tell me where you provide health insurance for your companies overseas. And finally, let me just say this. Paul Tsongas said it well yesterday. He is not a flake of mine. He's a distinguished former member of the United States Senate. When he made the characterization about your ad, and he called it reprehensible and challenged you to withdraw it. Mr. Romney, let's put the ads aside and talk about health care. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about training. Let's talk about new jobs. Let's talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about our different vision for Massachusetts. That's what the people of Massachusetts want to talk about, and that's what I think they ought to hear about.
Mr. Romney.
Then I want to know why you spent millions of dollars showing advertisements of strikers in a company I had nothing to do with, talking about Staples, one of the finest companies in the state of Massachusetts that employs 1,200 people here with an average wage of $35,000, and talked about them not having health care benefits when your companies don't have health care benefits. Why you spent millions of dollars doing that is beyond me if you're so interested in talking about the issues, because that's all I have talked about up until 1 week ago when we revealed from an article in one of the Boston papers something about your blind trust that appeared not to be quite so blind.
Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Romney, I'll provide those in detail. I'll provide them right after that, right down here in detail.
Why'd you do
about the minimum wage, give you the document where you said you were against the increase in the minimum wage for your fundraisers, and then you had a different opinion when you were talking on national television. And I will talk also about, I don't know why you wouldn't meet with the strikers with that flim-flam deal of yours out there in Indiana. Quite frankly, I am bothered about the pain of the people of Massachusetts. You may be all frustrated about it, but your pain and this advertising and my pain from your advertising I'm out there pales to what is happening in this city and what is happening in Lowell and Lawrence, in New Bedford and Fall River, where people can't get jobs. Now, if you take a great deal of satisfaction about exchanging papers about this, I would just say finally this about your advertisement, about the Kennedy interests in the Washington investment. My nephew and I have blind trusts. We have no control over those trusts, and we conform with the Ethics Committee. Mr. Romney, the Kennedys are not in public service to make money. We have paid too high a price in our commitment to the public service of the
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Kennedy, a question for Mr. Romney.
Now, Mr. Romney, when are you going to tell us?
I'm sorry. Was it my turn to respond, or were you?
Well, I was going to end it there, but if you want to respond 30 seconds more, then we're going to move on. I'm not getting a sense we're making much progress.
What I was going to say is that Flim Flam company in Indiana that you're talking about happens to have a plant that employs 300 people in Holyoke, Massachusetts. I'm sure they wouldn't be very happy to hear about it. And I continue to indicate that I was not associated with that business in Indiana, and you know that. And I also feel that it's inappropriate for us to have to engage in discussions about your personal family history. We're all sympathetic with that. And yet that is not relevant to what's being discussed here. Mayor Marion Barry gave you a no-bid deal, your family a no-bid deal, that he wouldn't give to me or anybody else in this country, and we all know it.
Gentlemen.
But let's move on. Let's move on. Let's talk about the issues you want to talk about.
15 seconds, Senator Kennedy, and that's it on this issue.
I'll pass.
Okay, Senator Kennedy, it's your turn to ask a question to Mr. Romney.
When, Mr. Romney, are you going to tell the people of Massachusetts which health care program you favor? We had 8 or 9 different programs that Democrats and Republicans had introduced in the Congress and the Senate in the last session. We had a number that were introduced by the Republicans. When are you going to tell the people of the Massachusetts which health care program that you're in favor of and why you're in favor of it? And if you're not prepared to tell us tonight, maybe you tell us when we're up in Holyoke in 2 days from now.
Mr. Romney.
Well, I'm happy to tell you which one I come closest to. There's no one that
Which one do you support?
I'll tell you which one I come closest to supporting, and that's the one of Senator Lloyd Bentsen, which was introduced in 1991.
That's not health insurance reform.
Which was a start.
That's
which
insurance
is a good start.
reform.
Which is a good start, and which is something which I think this country needs. I go across the state, I see 600,000 people who don't have insurance. I want universal coverage. I want everyone in Massachusetts and in this country to have insurance. I think we had to start by saying we're going to have portability. We're also going to make sure people can't be denied on the basis of pre-existing illness. We need to have a subsidy. That was not in his plan, but a subsidy for those people who are low income and can't afford insurance. We need to make sure that all people, not just corporations, can deduct on a tax basis the cost of their premiums. We also need to make sure that there's not discrimination in rates between big companies and small companies. All of these things, I believe, are a first step to reaching universal coverage. I also have a plan in bringing down the cost of health care. I've worked in health care much of my life as an investor in the industry and also as a consultant to the industry to learn about it, helping hospitals become more competitive. I have a plan. I have a position paper on health care. I'm happy to show it to you, Senator, anytime you'd like. But I don't understand why you didn't support Senator Bentsen's plan in 1991. We'd have had more people covered today.
Senator.
Mr. Romney, it isn't a question of showing me your paper. It's a question of showing all of the people in here that are watching this program the paper.
Well, they
ought to have an opportunity to know. What is the cost of your program?
I don't have a cost to my program.
You don't have a cost?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I don't have the congressional.
I
don't have the congressional budget office.
Do you have any other estimates?
I don't have the congressional budget office that goes through and calculates the cost of my program, as it did for yours. The cost of your program was billions of dollars in additional deficit. I am not in favor of a program that will add to our taxes or add to our deficit.
Well, what is the cost?
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
What is the cost of the tax incentives on the deficit?
I'm sorry?
Will be the cost in terms of the tax incentives that you provide? What will be the impact of that on the budget?
Well, the impact, I do not know the specific number
so
of the impact of that on the budget, Senator Kennedy, and I think it's a wonderful idea to take it through piece by piece. And
that's what you have to do as a legislator.
I understand,
that's exactly what you have to do as a legislator. what I had to do in getting the report.
Senator Kennedy, I understand your position. I'm happy, and I have a position paper on health care. I do distribute that. Don't say to people, gee, you can't get one. We do have that. We distribute that. I have health care professionals for Romney who've been working and have helped work with me in that position paper. But let me tell you, Senator, I do not believe in the type of employer mandates which you placed upon your plan. I do not believe in a government takeover of the health care system, which was part of your plan. I don't believe the American people or even a Democratic Congress were willing to accept a government takeover of our health care plan. And that was the error I think you made.
I would just point out that everyone on Medicare better be concerned, because that is a governmental program. The 350,000 veterans that are getting medical benefits in Massachusetts, that is provided by the Veterans Administration. And evidently, you have some difference in Social Security. Why is Social Security all right, Medicare all right, and veterans all right, and trying to provide a shared responsibility like we have for the United States Senate and the federal employees? Why is that wrong?
I think it's a wonderful idea for people to have the choice of being able to purchase different plans.
Well,
I do not think it's a good idea to have the federal. I do not think it's a good idea to have the federal government take over our health care system.
That isn't what our
I don't think it's a good idea for the federal government to place global budgets on a state to say how many teaching universities we're going to have that teach medicine, how many students get to be in which specialty, how many get to be general practitioners. I don't think it's a good idea to have price controls set on the economy and on that major part of our economy.
Do you think we have too many specialists now?
Do I think we have too many specialists now? You know what?
Do you or not?
Senator, let me tell you something. I don't think it's the, let me tell you, do I think so? Yes. Do I think that's relevant? No. Do you know why? Because the free market economy is the best at setting how many specialists we have, not some bureaucrats in Washington.
Okay. We have just had 6 exciting minutes on health care. Mr. Romney, your question to Senator Kennedy.
Do I have a question here? Let's talk about something else then. Senator, when you were in Worcester not long ago, it was for a forum on crime, on juvenile crime. There was a young perpetrator that stood up. You were there with Janet Reno, and he said that the reason he had become involved in crime was that he had had no father, had seen no fathers in his community, and that the only men he had seen were corrupt. The question I have for you is that given the fact that the family is the foundation of our country, what will you do as a United States Senator to build and strengthen the families of America?
Well, first of all, there's no easy, simple answer to that, Mr. Romney, and you understand it, and everyone in this city understands it, that you can't just pass legislation and expect that you're going to suddenly create a nurturing atmosphere and a climate that's going to give that kind of support to that child. There's no question. What we can do is, and what we did do in the crime bill, is begin to try and establish a framework of nurturing and caring, of outreach into the communities in a variety of different ways, and I think that's very important. We have tried to do it in the education field, 0 to 3, with the extension of the Head Start program. You show me a 4th or 5th grader that has dropped out of school, who's repeated the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, or 5th grade. I will show you either a drug addict, a child abuser, a teenage mother. We have to try and build preventive programs. We have to give children something to say yes to, and that is why the community policing program under Mayor Menino that has been developed here, and why the new community policing program in Worcester, which is just getting started with the $1.9 million grant that we were able to get to them, for them, because they had a good program, Mr. Romney, and I was ready to fight for them, and I did, and we got the funds, and we're going to make a difference in that community. But I'm here tonight to say I haven't got a silver bullet to the answer about how we're going to deal with these issues. What you have to develop is a family that is there. You have to develop a community. You have to develop a sense of caring, and that involves much more than just a piece of legislation that can be considered in the United States Congress and Senate.
Mr. Romney.
I think it's a defining issue and one of the critical issues that we face as a society, which is how we're going to strengthen our family and our families. I see our legislation over the past how many decades has led to something which I think was not intended, but that is the growth in births out of wedlock. Now with 30% of all children in our nation being born out of wedlock. When that young man stood up and said he had no fathers, saw no fathers in his community, and that he never saw a man that wasn't corrupt, that shook me. And I said, what are we doing wrong? And in my view, we have to start by saying, let's make sure we don't create incentives for kids to have kids, because they are. Let's change our welfare system to make sure that kids who get on welfare stay home with their parents. Let's make sure they go to work right away, and let's make sure also that if they have an additional child while they're on wedlock, while they're on welfare, that we don't continue to pay more and more money for every single child they have on welfare. Number one. Number two, let's look at our education system and recognize we're going to have to do something in our schools. Wait a second, Senator, it's my turn. That we're going to have to do something in our schools that we haven't done for a long time, and that is to teach character there, to teach our kids to respect other people, to abhor violence, but also to recognize that you don't bring a child into this world until you can care and nurture for it, and that we can have families of a husband and wife that can bring a child and care for it in a way that a single mom in high school just can't. There are things we can do. It's too important, too critical an issue to just brush aside as a crime issue or something of that nature.
Well, let me just point out, if they have the provisions in the program that the President signed with regards to character building, Mr. Romney. And I included it in the bill. And that is an important provision. We had broad support for it. We got some funding for that program this very year. But the fact is, you know, we were seeing the number of children that were living in poverty during the period of the 1960s go down. They went down in the 1970s. And you want to know something? Under the Reagan-Bush economic program, under the economic program you want to return to, the total number of children that are living in poverty, the total number of children out of wedlock. This has happened, you know, we've had Republican presidents during this period of time, and the cutting back of support systems for children, and most of all, for families to get jobs. If you're not going to provide a climate and an atmosphere for men and women to be able to work and provide for their children, you're going to see the breakdown of the family as well. And under your economic program, under the program of Mr. Reagan and Mr. Bush, we saw the growth in terms of the unemployment, the growth in the number of children living in poverty, the growth in terms of those children out of wedlock. I would much rather say that this isn't a narrow political hit, so to speak. This is too important to try and take partisan advantage. You're proud of your family, Mr. Romney, but you're no prouder of your family than I'm proud of mine. And I think what we ought to put those issues about trying to make political hits on this matter and try and see what can be done to create an atmosphere and a climate within the community where children can be safe.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. We're going to give Mr. Romney an opportunity, a brief one, to rebut, then we're going to move to the next subject.
Senator, you talked about how important this was and not to make political hits. I mentioned nothing about politics or your position at all. I talked about what I do to help strengthen families, and you talked about Reagan-Bush. Look, I was an independent during the time of Reagan-Bush. I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush. My positions don't talk about things that you suggest they talk about. This isn't a political issue. That's why I raised it, to talk about something other than a political issue.
Senator
Let's not
Kennedy,
get into credit and blame on something so important.
Senator Kennedy, a question for Mr. Romney. We're going to give you each, we're going to take 3 minutes for these next two issues to get us back on track so we can get a few more issues here. Thank you.
Mr. Romney, should you be elected, and should the Senate of the United States become a Republican, why do you believe having Jesse Helms, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, having Orrin Hatch, who is a strong opponent to the rights of privacy and a woman's right to choose as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, having Al D'Amato, chairman of the Banking Committee, Strom Thurmond, how will that help advance the interests of Massachusetts? What demonstrable evidence is it that any of them have really cared very much about our people?
Mr. Romney.
Senator Kennedy, this is not a race about all of those people. It happens to be a race between you and me, number one. Number two, I think most people who are looking in and considering this race, as they consider all those names that you read off, and I'd add to it Strom Thurmond and Senator Byrd and Jesse Helms, and you mentioned Jesse Helms, and they look down there and they see what I'll call a gridlock club. I don't think they see a dime's worth of difference between us, between that group. You and them, because they've been there so long, and you continue to play politics in the old way. In an organization like a company, when people say it's political, it means that people are more concerned with taking credit and assigning blame than they are with getting the job done. And there's been too much of that going on in Washington. Let's stop having the partisan bickering. Let's get people to work together on both sides of the aisle. And by the way, aren't you more concerned about Nancy Kassebaum taking your spot than you are with the other ones?
No. Senator Kennedy?
The fact of the matter is there's party discipline. Learn the United States Senate. There wasn't a single, not one Republican. I've heard you describe yourself as a moderate. Is not being a conservative, is not being a liberal, is not being a moderate. There wasn't one Republican, not one Republican senator that voted for the Budget Act in this last Congress that provided real cuts in spending. Not one. You can say you're going to be independent here, but the way that system, if you're going to try and get on the committees, you're going to have to toe the line. Everyone else has in terms of the Republican Party down there, and I can't believe that Bob Dole is going to let you off the hook any earlier than he's let any of the others off.
I get a quick response. Senator Kennedy, is that how you run your operation down there?
You bet
toe the line? You toe the line?
That's exactly how I do get
toe the
health care
line?
passed. Building coalitions. Building coalitions. That's what I do.
On only one side of the aisle?
Confidence and trust.
On only one side of the aisle?
I have the confidence and trust of those on both sides, Mr. Romney.
Well, but that may be why we haven't had health care.
Gentlemen, okay. Now, I'm going to ask you...
I got time to answer that one.
Okay.
I got time to answer that one.
15 seconds. Let's go.
15 seconds is, if it had been easy, Mr. Romney, it would have been done a long time ago. It took 7 years for us to convince enough Republicans to sign the Family and Medical Leave Bill. And there are 250,000 families that are going to participate in that program this year. And you want to know something? The day after we pass health care, you'll support it, just like you support Social Security and Medicare and minimum wage as right now.
Mr. Romney, a question for Senator Kennedy.
Well, I should tell you that I do support the Family and Medical Leave Bill, and I support a number of other pieces of legislation which I think are important because I'm not going there as a partisan politician.
Please.
The next question. The next question.
Who's got it?
I think Mr. Romney.
I've got some more.
Just wait a second. Just wait a second. You'll get there.
It's his turn now, and then it's your turn.
Women. Women are concerned about the glass ceiling. Women that I have seen in organizations have not been able to have the opportunity they deserve to have in getting ahead in organizations. If we're going to compete as a nation, we've got to draw upon the skills of women and minorities. And I see organizations from the federal government to corporations that are not drawing on the skills and abilities of women and minorities. What are your views about breaking through the glass ceiling?
Strongly support it. That's been my record. I've co-sponsored the legislation. And you're not going to find a member of the United States Senate that's stronger supporter. I mean, we may have some difference, Mr. Romney, but you're not going to find it. But beyond that, I fought against the Republican-imposed restrictions setting financial ceiling on women's right to sue in discrimination on the jobs. We face Republican opposition every step of the way. We have ceilings now for women's recovery, against discrimination in the workplace and sexual harassment. We've got a long ways to go. We had opposition from the Republicans when we were working on a women's health bill. We faced a filibuster when we tried to get women's health included in the NIH a year ago. We've made progress. Listen, I'm glad you're all for these matters now. You know, I'm glad but we don't have that kind of an opportunity in the United States Senate. Glass ceiling, read my record. I'm a co-sponsor of the toughest bills to deal with it, and we'll continue to battle for it.
Mr. Romney.
When you said you're glad to hear I'm for it now, let me assure you, Senator, that my entire life has been one of working with women and helping women through the glass ceiling. As Chief Executive Officer of Bain & Company, as you know, the highest paid person in our firm was a woman, and the chairman of the board is a woman. The chief financial officer in my firm is a woman. I have backed women entrepreneurs. One individual came to me with an idea for building a chain of child care centers that would have child care at the work site. I backed her and helped her build that business. But now let me tell you, what I think we need to do is to require all public...
Why do you have to boast about it?
I don't boast about it. When you say you're happy to see me come now to this position, I feel somewhat in an opportunity that I have to respond to that, because I don't think it's an appropriate thing to say to someone without being able to respond. Now let me tell you my point on the issue. My point on the issue is I believe that public companies and federal agencies should be required to report in their annual 10K the number of minorities and women by income group within the company, so we can identify where the glass ceiling is and break through it. And I think that the market of America will say that company has not promoted women, has not promoted minorities, and will put pressure on American corporations and agencies to respond.
Senator Kennedy, the last question is from you.
From you. Mr. Romney, you have supported the balanced budget amendment. You have not been precise tonight about what we do on health care, which program you'd support. I'm wondering if you will tell the people of Massachusetts how you would, as a member of the United States Senate, balance the budget, the $870 billion that would be needed over the next 5 years to balance the budget.
Of course, that's actually, I'm sorry, you finished?
Sure.
I'm sorry. Of course, that's a very easy thing to do, and I'll do it here in 1 minute. But let me give you a start. Let me give you a start,
Quick,
Senator,
easy answers.
from what my view is.
Simple, easy answers.
From what, and I'm sure you have the same objective. I should certainly hope so. I saw the president was considering raising taxes to do so. That is not the choice that I would make. What I would do.
Well, you want to cut them, don't you,
there are a number of things that I would do in order to bring down spending, which I think is the place we have to look to. And I don't care whether we balance the budget by the year 2000 or 2002 or 2004. I want to have a time by which we would balance the budget. And to get there are a number of things that I think we ought to do. Federal pensions is number one. A $3 million pension for a United States Senator, I think, is excessive. I think we also have to cut the cost of Congress. I also believe that the 250,000 people who could be laid off from the federal government, not laid off, taken out by attrition, as Vice President Al Gore suggested in his plan. Come on, folks. Vice President Al Gore suggested in his plan that through attrition over time, some 250,000 people could come out of the federal government by combining agencies and through another host of matters. I believe that we're going to see Medicaid reduced through managed care alternatives. I also believe we're going to have agricultural subsidies reduced. But let's say that if I give you my whole list,
Kennedy
and I'll be happy to, you'll see that I can come up with a balanced budget.
Senator Kennedy, you have about 45 seconds.
It's just so happens I'd like to cost them out. I have voted to cut $250 billion. We see a 40% reduction in the federal deficit with the budget that I supported at the president. Mr. Romney, the 250,000, we brought it 40% down, and the Republicans left it. The 250,000's already been committed. You can't double dip. It's 250,000, and you think you can balance the budget? I wrote it down here on pensions,
Senator, I had 1 minute.
Congress
Come
cuts,
on.
Gentlemen,
cuts, and on managed care.
Our time is up. Anything we do now comes right out of your closing statements. I'm sorry to tell you that, but it's the truth. Now, Senator Kennedy, you have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Mr. Romney run the coin toss and has elected to go last, so you're up now.
Thank you, Mr. Bodie, the Boston Herald and Globe. I've been honored to represent the citizens of Massachusetts in the United States Senate over the last 32 years. And this has been the deepest honor of my life. During these next 2 weeks, I'm going to ask as many people as I can see and that Vicki can see for their help and their support in this election. I need your help. I need your support. I need your vote. I want to build on the building blocks that we have established in the Congress over the period of the last 2 years. We haven't solved all the problems, but no one has fought harder for the jobs that we have and for the jobs that we can create. And with your help and with your support, I think we can see an expanding economy. And the best way that I can ever thank you is to be the best United States Senator there is, and that I pledge that I will be.
Mr. Romney now has 1 minute for his closing thoughts.
Well, as I go across the state, people often ask me, why are you challenging the unbeatable Ted Kennedy? And the truth is that after 32 years, I believe that our country is headed in the wrong direction and that it's time for a change of leadership in Washington. I've gone across the state to ask voters what they think, and they agree. A couple in Cape Cod who doesn't understand why the family living across the hall on welfare lives better than they do. A mom in Waltham who is concerned about the child care for her daughter. A couple that lives in Worcester, a senior couple that doesn't understand why the federal government wants recovering drug addicts to live in senior housing. I believe this election comes down to whether or not we're going to have a change in direction. If you believe that the direction we're headed in, that Senator Kennedy has been leading us in, is right, then you ought to vote for him. He'll keep doing more of the same. If you believe, like I do, that we can do better in crime, in welfare, re-engaging our poor, reducing the enormous burden that we put on the middle class, If you believe these things, and if you believe that the promise and the bright future that our children deserve can be achieved, I'd be honored to receive your support. Thank you.
Mr. Romney, thank you very much. I want to thank Mr. Romney and Senator Kennedy. I'd like to thank our press panel, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, for bringing you about this debate tonight. It has been a lively evening. Be sure to watch the second and concluding debate Thursday evening at 8 p.m. live from Holyoke Community College. I'm Ken Bodie. Good night, and thanks for watching.
This Massachusetts Senate debate was the first of two debates scheduled between Senator Kennedy and his Republican challenger Mitt Romney. They planned another debate sponsored by the Boston Globe and Boston Herald this Thursday evening from Mount Holyoke College, beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We again planned live coverage here on C-SPAN. And you can again see this program tomorrow morning around
The panel for tonight's debate consists of three reporters who have been covering the Senate race in Massachusetts. Sally Jacobs of the Boston Globe, Joe Battenfeld of the Boston Herald, and Tovia Smith of WBUR-FM. During the first half of the debate, the candidates will be questioned by these reporters. The rules are simple. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and his opponent will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. In the second half of the debate, the candidates will question one another. It was determined earlier by a coin toss that the first question from Sally Jacobs will go to Senator Kennedy. Sally Jacobs.
Senator, you're the fourth most senior member of the United States Senate. Your opponent is a novice who's never held or even run for office. Why is this race even close?
In Massachusetts, as throughout New England, we're facing uncertain times, primarily on the economy. We have seen since 1988 to 1992 some 400,000 jobs that were lost in Massachusetts. We've seen some recovery in the past 18 months, a 3-point decline in the unemployment rate, so we're on our way back. But these are not the good jobs that we lost in the 88 to 92 period. And when there is a loss of jobs, there is uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, there's anxiety. And when there's anxiety, there is a willingness to listen to simple, easy answers, and they're wrong. And that is the kind of solution that my opponent is offering.
Senator Kennedy.
The soundness of the Massachusetts economy depends on infrastructure, like we have in the expressway, the Third Harbor Tunnel. It depends upon incentives in the private sectors. And that's what we have been doing in building the biotech, the software industry, the telecommunications, the fiber optic industry, as well as bringing the return of manufacturing in. And it takes well-trained, well-educated individuals that will be able to have the best jobs, good pay, and compete with any other part of the world. That's what I'm about in the United States Senate. Training, education, ensuring that we're going to have good jobs to build the Massachusetts economy. And I'm proud of the efforts that we have had so far.
Let me ask the audience, please. You're clapping after every response. You really are eating up a lot of time. Wait till there's something really to clap for, okay? Tovia Smith, a question for Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, for 30 years you've been a leading advocate for social welfare and anti-poverty programs. There's now a wide public perception that our welfare system is deeply flawed, and many people see you as the embodiment of an outdated political philosophy of a big spending liberal government. Has our social welfare system gone too far, and aren't you now out of sync with public sentiment?
I'm for workfare. I think there has to be an expectation that men and women who are able-bodied are going to have to work. The men and women that contribute for that kind of support system are working. Able-bodied men and women must be able to work. But it's so interesting to me to see, having been in the United States Senate, that we had talk about welfare reform under President Reagan and under President Bush, and neither of those presidents did it.
Reporters' questions and then ask each other questions during the second half. The debate runs about an hour.
Test 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, test 1, 2.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Ken Bodie, the moderator for tonight's debate. This is the first of two debates between the two candidates for the United States Senate, Senator Edward Kennedy and Mitt Romney. These debates came about as a result of an unprecedented cooperation between the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. The forum is also being broadcast live thanks to major television and radio stations in Massachusetts. Let me introduce the candidates. Edward Kennedy, the Democratic candidate, has served in the Senate since 1962. He is 62 years old and is a graduate of Harvard College and the University of Virginia Law School. Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate, has served as Chief Executive Officer of Bain Capital, a venture capital firm. He is 47 years old and a graduate of Brigham Young University, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Business School.
Anything about it. Finally, we have a president who's doing something about it, and I'll work with him. In the 1980s, I offered a welfare reform program that passed the United States Senate unanimously, received Republican and Democrat support, passed the House of Representatives, signed into law, and the Republicans refused to support that program. I'm concerned about the program, and I will work, when I return to the United States Senate, to make the changes so that everyone that can work will work. But I recognize that we need a support system for children. It's necessary to have a safety net for children, and I think that that has to be a part of any reform system.
Mr. Romney.
Everywhere I go, people are concerned about our welfare system, not because they think it's costing too much, and it is, but rather because they feel that it's not doing what it needs to do, and that's to bring people back into the American system and give them a hope and give them an opportunity to have their dreams fulfilled. We need a welfare reform plan, not like the one the senator passed in 1988 that was supposed to get people back to work, but 93% of which never did. We need a new welfare reform plan that insists on work from the very beginning, one like Governor Wells, one which also makes it easier and more attractive for employers to hire and train people who are on welfare. We need to bring work back to welfare.
Sally Jacobs, a question for Mr. Romney.
Mr. Romney, you personally oppose abortion and as a church leader have advised women not to have an abortion. Given that, how could you in good conscience support a law that enables women to have an abortion and even lets the government pay for it? If abortion is morally wrong, aren't you responsible for discouraging it?
One of the great things about our nation, Sally, is that we're each entitled to have strong personal beliefs, and we encourage other people to do the same. But as a nation, we recognize the right of all people to believe as they want and not to impose.
In dealing with the economy and dealing with the vital issues that are of the utmost importance to working families in Massachusetts.
Mr. Romney.
Sally, the real answer to your question is that people in Massachusetts have been watching for 32 years Senator Kennedy. They appreciate what he's done, but they recognize that our world has changed and that the answers of the 1960s aren't working anymore. And frankly, the senator's right when he says there's a challenge to our economy, and people recognize that government jobs just can't do it for Massachusetts. We need private sector jobs. And so they're looking for people who have skill and experience in the private sector, who know how to help create jobs, who will do the work of traveling from state to state and around the country to bring jobs to Massachusetts.
Joe Battenfeld. Joe Battenfeld, a question for Mr. Romney.
Yes, Mr. Romney, many undecided voters, even those inclined to vote for you, are concerned about losing Senator Kennedy's seniority. If elected, how would you ensure that Massachusetts doesn't suffer as a result?
I'll work tirelessly. I will work tirelessly to bring jobs to Massachusetts, to bring everything that can be brought to Massachusetts. Let me tell you, this idea of clout sometimes gets overstated. Every 6 years, you get a senator coming to a state with one of those big cardboard checks. And they have a whole file folder of them, and they try and convince you that all the money that comes here comes because of their clout. 2 years from now, it'll be John Kerry's turn. But the taxpayers of Massachusetts are seeing through that, and they recognize that those checks are drawn on their bank accounts, that we're the ones that are paying for all that pork. And they recognize that we have to have a Massachusetts that brings jobs from the private sector, that can employ our people, and that we cannot rely entirely upon government and pork. I'll work day and night to do everything I can, but I'll tell you one thing, it's time to have a senator who can create jobs.